Hello, welcome in. This is ClearPath Retirement Radio podcast. I am Stewart Smith here with Mitch Davies.
Good morning, everybody.
And we are going to talk about something unique this week. I really love the fact that we're going to talk about this, Mitch. So today is going to be specifically for women. And the reason that we're going to do this is because the thing that I think I've realized in the last 25 years of doing this is that, women are increasingly the primary financial decision makers. And yet most retirement planning is designed around men's careers, lifespans, and financial patterns. And women are unique and they have different needs. They have different goals. There's a lot going on there. So we're going to take a whole hour today and just talk about why women are different and why their retirement planning is a little different and specific strategies to maximize income, minimize taxes, and protect the future, right?
Sure.
We're going to actually give you some actionable steps to take and, why this is so important. And I'll just start the show here by sharing a little bit of why I feel passionate about this. My mother at age 51 got the worst news you can possibly get, and that she found out that my stepfather, who she'd been married to for many, many years, was diagnosed with cancer. And it wasn't a good form of cancer. And it was a cancer that would very quickly take him away from us in less than 18 months. And she was 51 at the time and was, planning for a future and a retirement that, he was very much a part of. And to make things even more difficult, at age 41, she had another child that my little brother, Zach, who has turned out to be a fine young man. But she had Zach, and at the time his father passed, he was 11. And so she was, all of a sudden, her world changed dramatically. And she went from planning a future with my stepfather, trying to raise a young son, and, overnight that all changed. And she was now facing retirement alone, facing it with the challenge of trying to raise, an 11-year-old. And it was a very big change for her family. And having, witnessed the fear and anxiety that caused her, because, my stepfather was a developer. They lived in, Alpharetta, right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. They lived in a beautiful home. They had done, he had done well. But, at the time, he was a risk taker. And at the time, he had, really rolled the dice, not seeing his illness coming down the pipe. He had rolled the dice and really taken some risk with his investments to try and, put everything into a couple of big deals that, had they come to fruition and he had not been taken from us early, would have probably set them up for life. And the fact that all of a sudden in the middle of those deals that he got sick and was very quickly taken from us, those deals did not come to fruition. And my mother was left to kind of try and pick up the pieces and put things back together. And I was 31 when I got the news, and I had just really gotten into this business. And so it was a huge learning experience for me to see this. And she, instead of, being a stay-at-home mother, which she was at the time, she had to, go back into the workforce. She, ended up working for, another 15, 18 years, and to be able to retire, not anywhere near the level that she had hoped for and that they had dreamed about. And so it was pretty tough for her, and she struggled with it. And this story is not unique. Women either face a sudden loss of their spouse, or they face a sudden divorce, maybe that they didn't see coming, many, many times, every day in this country. And it's a really scary place to be, because more than likely, statistically speaking, they weren't as involved in the financial stuff as the husband was. And so they're now have a learning curve that they've got to get through really quickly, and try and get their arms around the financial situation, and looking at the big picture and understanding where they stand. And I can tell you, like, not only are you dealing with the devastation of losing a spouse, either through death or divorce, but to have to, all of a sudden, take the reins of the whole financial picture and try and navigate through that landscape. I mean, that is a really tough place to be. So, if that's you, and if you are in that place, and you're looking for some advice, you're looking for guidance, you're looking for help, you're in the right place. This podcast is for you. And we're going to talk through, some different things here that I think matter. And, the first thing I'd like to talk about is, why is a women's retirement different? What makes it different? Well, the first thing that makes it different is, statistically speaking, women just live longer.
They do. Yeah.
They just do. And I've seen it with my own eyes for over 25 years now, that women just live longer. They take better care of themselves, typically. And, 1 in 3 women that live to age 65 will live to age 90. And that's a pretty crazy thing to think about. So, even if your spouse lives to full life expectancy, you're still going to find yourself at some point in life having to deal with this stuff.
Right.
And, God forbid that they leave us early, but even if they lived a full life expectancy, you're going to outlive them on, statistically speaking, for at least 2 to 3 years. So it's critical that you have a basic understanding of the financial matters, and what's happening in your household.
It is, Stewart. And, this is significant for me too. I mean, even in the 3 years I've been here, I've probably sat across from 1,000 couples, right? And it's always, generally we hear the story of everything's, like you said, planned around the husband's retirement, right? It's, hey, he's going to retire at 65, and this is our plan, and this is the healthcare plan, and this is what retirement out till whatever life expectancy we choose looks like. It's all based around that. And, it's just, I've seen this so many different times where that doesn't play out how you'd expect, and everything doesn't match that scenario perfectly. And it's very important for both sides to understand. And that's why I'm glad we're talking about this, because the woman needs to be able to see what it looks like past that, because of all these stats here. The retirement is going to be longer, the life's going to be longer. And at some point, you're probably statistically going to end up in charge of all this stuff.
Yeah. And, when you're looking at planning for a 30-year plus retirement, you got to be, you got to have a plan.
Yeah.
You can't just wing it for that time period. You have to really go. If you want to be successful, if you want to have the income that you need and that you desire for that kind of time frame, you have to really approach this thing strategically. You can't, there's some critical mistakes that you can make along the way that can cost you dearly. And what we want to talk about today is, some of the pitfalls that we see, some of the, mistakes that we see happen, and help you just get them on your radar screen. get you thinking about, these things and what, what they can do. And, I would say that, you really kind of need to look at this thing in segments, right? So, typically what we see is from about age 65 to 70, that is more what we would call your early retirement active years. So that's the years that you're doing more traveling, you're spending more money, you are, enjoying the things that you dreamed about enjoying in retirement. And then, when 70 hits through about age 80, those are the RMD years where required minimum distributions start, where you have to start taking money out of those, pre-tax IRAs and 401k accounts and to start paying taxes on those. Healthcare costs typically rise in that period. And you really have to, plan for those things. And, required minimum distributions are something that they get a little complicated in how all that stuff works. And you need to have a basic understanding of that if you're going to be successful. And then, 80 plus, you're looking at some real issues there with, not only just, you know, eh, in the fact that you may at some point need some very expensive skilled nursing care that we know and we've seen can really impact someone's portfolio and really make a dent in it, if not deplete it. But you also have to do some legacy planning. You have to do some estate planning. You have to think about wills and trust and all of those wonderful things. And so we're going to kind of talk about that. But having the right tools in place is critical if you want to really be successful in this whole thing that we call retirement. What's different for women? And, this statistic caught me off guard, but I tell you, the fact that women still in 2026 still only make an average of 82 cents to every dollar that men make, that is just, that's a little crazy that that's still the fact today.
Yeah.
And, over a 40-year career, that gap compounds into a retirement savings shortfall of over $400,000 compared to their male counterparts. And that's a lot. That could be significant. And anybody will tell you 400,000 in retirement is a huge number and it can really be the difference between meeting your income goals and not meeting your income goals. And so it's something you have to really think about.
It is. It is. And it even compounds into other things. I mean, so obviously you're earning, less money, and that presents later issues, right? That presents issues with Social Security. That presents issues with not having the ability to save and defer as much, because that 400,000 is a lot. But if you've been investing that over your career, that could compound to millions of dollars. So not having that available, not only in retirement, but to invest during your peak years. A lot of people we see in their 50s, they start really ramping up contributions, right? They start really, hey, I'm going to start putting 16, 20%, really trying to maximize those peak years. And for women, that might not be available, right? You might not have the ability to do that. So it compounds into a lot of other aspects.
Compounds into a lot of things. Like Mitch said, if you have less earnings, you have a lower Social Security payout. Social Security is based on earnings. And, it's so the other thing that we see is, women typically being having the kind of caregiver nature that most women have, they are the ones that end up taking a break from the workforce for X amount of years to either care for children or to care for parents, but that typically falls on women. I'm not saying it always does, but it typically does. And, if you take that time out for caregiving, that further reduces, the opportunities for you to earn and to really make an impact financially. And, that's really not ideal for women. And 66% of family caregivers in the US are women. Honestly, I would have thought that number would have been a little higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, the average time out of the workforce for caregiving for women is 12 years. These are some crazy statistics
Yeah.
here. The average lifetime income loss due to caregiving is 324,000. So not only are you making 82 cents to every dollar of your male counterpart, but which is going to lead to potentially 400,000 less over a 40-year career. But in addition to that, you might take 12 years off and lose another 324,000 that you could have, earned. And then that in turn would reduce your Social Security, just for the caregiving piece would reduce it, if you took 12 years out of the workforce, another $142,000.
Right.
So,
And the difference goes even further than that. Like that's just the direct loss. But if you consider 12 years out of the workforce, again, probably in peak years, I mean, that could slow down, that kind of gap can slow down career development. That can slow down the ability to get promotions and work through the ranks. You know what I mean? So it's the difference compounds way further than that. And that's why this is so important to talk about.
yeah, and I mean, you got to understand, like I think Mitch was talking earlier, is that all that money could be invested,
Right.
and you could be earning returns on that money that are compounding over, a long time. And what does that add up to? It can really be devastating to a woman. And then if you find yourself having earned less, taking time out of the workforce to be a caregiver, and then all of these other things are impacted, and then all of a sudden you find yourself a widow. I mean, it is just obstacles that are extremely hard to navigate and overcome for women. So, that's why we're talking today. And that's why we want to talk through these things. So, 5 retirement challenges that are unique to women. So we've already talked about the longevity risk. They live longer and they need more income. So not only all the things we just said, but in addition to that, they live longer and need more money, right? Lower benefits. So again, if you pay less into Social Security and you have less earnings and all of that stuff, you're going to have a lower check when it comes to it. Widowhood risk, which again, we just mentioned. It's like you could just wake up and find yourself facing these things all by yourself at no fault to you. And life throws us some pretty big curveballs at times, and there's not a lot you can do about it. Another thing that we see is healthcare costs. Women spend significantly more in healthcare in retirement. And that is absolutely true. And I think it's because, just on a basic level, women will go to the doctor when they need to.
Yeah.
Women will address issues when they need to. Men aren't as good with that. They fight it. They don't want to go. They don't want to deal with stuff, and they let stuff linger longer, and they just don't get it addressed. So they don't end up spending as much money. And that's probably why they also don't live as long, right? So it's all part of the big picture. And, tax risk. So survivors, if you find yourself all of a sudden widowed and you have lost a spouse heading into retirement, then you also have to understand that now your tax bracket just got cut in half, but your income needs did not get cut in half. and the need to access pre-tax accounts probably just went up, which puts you not only needing more pre-tax money and having to pay, claim more income, but in with half the tax bracket you had, going in. And so that can be a problem.
It can. I mean, we see, a direct jump from what's usually the 12% bracket to the 22, 24. And that going from that in 1 year is a significant difference.
Significant, and can really change the tax picture dramatically for you. And, that's going to further deplete assets. And, it's just, this is why, planning and modeling through these things. And every time we do a retirement income plan with a couple, and I have to go and model the loss of a spouse in that process, it's I hate to do it.
Yeah.
I hate to even talk about it. But it's got to be addressed. And so, when we model through that and we really show them, like, okay, here's what would happen. So, first of all, the lower of the two Social Securities is going away. The survivor gets to keep the higher one, but the lower one goes away. The pension that he works so hard for is gone, right? Like, it more than likely, most people are taking straight life, and it just depends on your pension elections. But, the pension that you had, his pension is now probably off the table. And now, you just lost two guaranteed income streams that were really supporting your lifestyle. And now you're living on one Social Security, and you're having to access, any investments, and really put a strain on the stuff that you work so hard to save just to make ends meet, and paying more taxes and everything else. And so we model through that and with people, and we get a real clarity and understanding on, is this doable, right? Is this doable? And that's where things like life insurance come into place, because if it's not, then maybe a life insurance policy to make sure that there is survivor income. Maybe that's something that you need to be thinking through. So, you know, the next thing I want to talk about is a concept that we really use for everybody, but I think it's important that women understand this on a basic level, because every time we share this with, with couples, and really with anybody, they always tell us, like, you've never heard it broken down that simple. And so, this will help you guys really, if you don't kind of understand this stuff and it's a little foggy for you, this is going to help to put it in perspective, that I think you can really grasp here. But what we like to do here at ClearPath is kind of build what we call your fiscal house as you enter into retirement. And it's really a philosophy of how to structure things that we've learned over 25 years of planning is leads to the highest statistical probability that you will meet your income goals, and that you will be, protected, and really enjoy the kind of retirement that you want. And this is, something that's proven. We've seen it over and over again through all kinds of markets. It works. So let's talk about the fiscal house and how that works. So, a house consists of three things mainly, right? And, when you start to build a house, the first thing you want to build is your foundation. You build a strong foundation, and then after you're finished with the foundation, you build your walls. And then once your walls are up, you're going to build a really nice roof to cover everything, right? So that's the basic tenets of a really well-built house. And when it comes to retirement planning, we're going to use that analogy, but let's talk about the foundation first. So when you talk about retirement planning and you're using the fiscal house analogy, the foundation would be what we call your safe money, right? So uh, Mitch, help us understand when it comes to safe money, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. And, it's so important to have a mix of all of these. And again, the foundation is the key to this, right? The foundation is the money that we know we could draw on if the markets are down, that we can trust, that we know isn't going to move much. So what does that look like? It usually looks like things like CDs, money markets accounts. Think of short-term bonds, think of treasuries, think of annuities, fixed index annuities, think of things that aren't going to fluctuate much with the market. So we know, hey, if the market has a bad year, this is going to stay relatively stable. This is going to continue to help fund those years, and we could lean on the other assets to continue to grow.
Yeah. So it's very important that you have that foundation in place. Everyone needs safe money.
Yep.
We never know what's coming down the pipe with the markets. And so that safe money is critical, not only, financially speaking, but also psychologically, right? You need some safe money that is always going to be there. And that is very critical to your planning process. So after we built that foundation and we have an appropriate amount of safe money, what we're going to want to do next is the walls. And the walls, the way that we structure walls are income producing assets that aren't necessarily directly correlated with the markets. So, that could be, and again, how much money you have in the walls is very dependent on your income needs. So the percentages that you allocate to the walls and your foundation changes according to your income needs. But when we think of walls, we think of things like, dividend paying stocks. Those are typically companies like, utilities, things that, people need no matter what the economy's doing. I mean, you got to keep the lights on, right? You need energy, you need food, you need, those type of companies that are good old companies that have been around with strong balance sheets that are paying a really good dividend. And that's, one thing. The other thing would be, maybe some, high quality corporate bonds, companies like, Amazon, the big boys that are borrowing money and that are going to pay the money back with the interest, that they said they would. I mean, that there's very little risk involved in them defaulting on that. We could talk about maybe rental properties where, if you have rental properties and the economy goes bad, more than likely you're going to keep getting your rent unless your tenant is really impacted and has to move out. But, those are the type of things that we're talking about, things that can produce income, and maybe aren't as impacted by a major swing in the market. And finally, the roof is your opportunity for growth. What we hear time and time again, and especially from women when they come in and sit with us, is I need three things. I need you to protect what I have. I need you to grow it, and I need income, right? And this is how we achieve that. So the roof is going to be, your opportunity for growth, your opportunity to earn more than inflation, your opportunity to keep your buying power intact over long stretches of time. And, when I think of growth, I think of stocks.
Yeah.
And, it could be different variations. It could be a mix of stocks. It could be, ETFs. It could be index funds. It could be, but when it comes all down to it, it's stocks. And, you have to have some exposure.
You do. And, Stuart, typically the mistake we see, especially from women, just statistically, not always, but they generally don't have enough in the roof, right? Women on average are more conservative in investing than men. And we see that they might not have too much in the roof. They're trying to hold on. We'll see a lot in the foundation, a lot in the walls. We'll see a lot in CDs and money markets and high yield savings. But it's very important, especially if you're considering you're probably going to have a longer retirement. It's very important to have some allocation in the roof. We need to be hitting those, when the S&P has those big years, we need to be involved in that. We can't just sit on the sideline of that every year.
And that brings up the next big question that we get is like, hey, Stewart, Mitch, how much do we need in the roof?
Right.
Like, we get it all the time. So to really give you a rule of thumb there, and it's not the same for everyone, but let's give you a good rule of thumb here. We use something called the prudent investor rule. And the prudent investor rule works like this. You would take the number 100 and subtract your age. So if you're sitting with us and you're 60 and you're retiring, then, you would take 60 from 100, it will leave you 40. You should never have more than 40% of your assets in the roof. You should never have more than 40 exposed to real risk in stocks. And we see all the time, we come in and, we're working, I was working with a 71-year-old yesterday, and he came in and he had 70% of his money in the roof. And, I showed him, he didn't really even understand that. And I showed it to him and he was a little alarmed. I mean, he just didn't, he felt like that was way more risk than he needed to be taking at this point. And so, just take a minute and just think through for just a second, how much of your money is safe money? How much of your money is income producing money? And how much of your money is exposed to stocks and risk?
Yeah.
And just think, is your house, in order? Is your foundation enough? Do you have too much exposure with your roof? I mean, it's really easy to grasp that concept and understand. And if you don't know and you really want to get your arms around this and you like, that concept of how, we structure things, go to clearpathretirement.com. Let us know that you want to do, a ClearPath retirement review where we can sit down and really look at your house and see how is it structured currently. You can hear from us directly how, we would recommend that you restructure things if we feel like it's not, in the right order. And, that everybody's different. Everybody has different income needs. Everybody, but for the most part, what we see is people either come to us and they're, like Mitch said, they're too conservative. So, they feel, okay about when the market starts going up and down, but what they're not really thinking through is the impact of that conservative allocation over the 20, 30-year retirement and how that can impact them. Or they're too aggressive and they've got way too much money exposed to risk and they don't really understand that. And a lot of times what we'll see is they've got all this money exposed to risk. They've got all this money in the roof and they're not even really reaping the rewards of taking that risk.
Right.
Their returns are not even, in line with that kind of risk. If you're going to take a lot of risk, which, we do have some folks who are like, hey, we're good with it. Like, we want to take this kind of risk. You've got to be reaping the rewards of that risk. And, when I've looked at people who have, 70, 80% exposed to the roof and in stocks in the market, and when we do their returns, I mean, they're getting like 7, 8% over, the last 10 years. And I'm like, we can do that with reducing the risk dramatically.
Right.
And it's really doesn't make sense. You're taking all this risk. If the market does, really correct and then you're going to take a huge hit, but you're not even getting the benefits of that kind of risk when the markets do well.
Right. And the most important thing right now is people, when it comes to finance, money, people tend to have a very short-term memory bias. And people will, this we see right now, this is a time where people they don't understand enough about how they're invested. And because the market's done so well the last 4 years, I mean, we haven't had a red year in 4 years. And when you're in that environment, somebody who doesn't know very much about investing might just have a lot of risk, and they look at their stocks every few months. They're like, "Oh, I'm doing good," but they don't understand how risky they are because the market's been so good. So when we talk to a 71-year-old who's got 70% of the roof, he might feel okay about it today because he's looking at the last 3 years. He's like, "Yeah, it's done pretty well." But what if we have another 2022? Or if we have another 2018 or 2008? Any of these bad years, and that's where people go, "Oh, wait, how's my house?" And that's why it's so important today. If you guys haven't looked at it in the last few years, like in 2026, it's more important than ever to look at it because the market's been on a crazy run, and historically, this just doesn't sustain. So we need to look at the long term.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, like Mitch says, if you're wondering about your house, let us know, clearpathretirement.com. Let's have a conversation, and we will do an analysis. We'll do a review of where you're at, and we'll at least where you stand, right? So let's talk about Social Security for a minute. So a couple of things I want to point out for women, because this is something that I think women need to understand. Your benefit for Social Security is based on your highest 35 years of earnings. If you don't have 35 years, then every year you don't have is a zero. And when they're going to do is they're going to take that, that average, and, they're going to factor in all these zeros that you were staying home taking care of the kids or your parents or whatever the case may have been. And, that is why women's, benefit is on average about 80% of what men's are. So let's talk about some things when it comes to Social Security that you may not think about. So a lot of times people struggle with this. And if you are going into retirement as a couple and you're trying to determine, when to take Social Security, I want women to understand that there's things that you need to think through to make sure that you're protecting both you and your spouse here, because if your spouse is the higher earning spouse in the marriage, and you are taking benefits early, we've already said that if you have two people over the age of, are already collecting Social Security, let's just put it that way, and one of them passes, the survivor gets the higher of the two and loses the smaller one. If you are the higher earning spouse and you take it early, then you are making that decision for both. So if your husband is the higher earner and you took time out of the workforce to be a caregiver, and you didn't earn as much, understand that if he elects to take it early, he is making a very important decision for both of you. And you really want to understand that. And you really want to have a conversation around that. Like, is that the smart thing to do? If he is wanting to go ahead and take it at 62 and take a 25% reduced benefit for life, he is in effect reducing your benefit as well, and the benefit that you would get to keep if he was no longer with us. So understand that. If that's the case and you still feel good about it and you want to do it, that's fine. But I just wanted to make sure that we point that out. And, each year that he delays past age 62 all the way up to age 70, that benefit is going to increase by 6 to 8% per year. And so that is pretty significant. And again, when he locks in, he's locking in for both of you. So definitely something we need to understand there. The other thing that we see a lot of is that women don't understand that the spousal benefit. And the way the spousal benefit works with Social Security is if you get to retirement and your benefit, and I'm speaking to the women, your benefit is less than your husband's, then you have a choice to make. First of all, if your benefit on your own benefit, on your own working history, is less than half of what your husband's benefit is or will be, you can, instead of electing your own benefit, you can not elect that benefit and choose to take what we call the spousal benefit. That is half of his. Okay. Do not leave money on the table here. If your benefit, because you took time out of the workforce and you were a caregiver and you did all of those incredibly important jobs that need to be done, taking care of the children or your parents or whatever the case was, which is extremely admirable, and I commend you for doing that, then you get to retirement and your benefits $800 a month, your estimate that you're looking at when you went to ssa.gov and created an account and pulled your latest estimate down and looked at it, and you see it's about 800 a month, and your husband's is looking like it's going to be about 3,000 a month, then you would not want to take your own benefit. You would want to opt for the spousal benefit, which would bump you from 800 to 1,500 a month. So be careful with that. The spousal benefit is important to understand. It is an option. A lot of times what couples will do is you can take your own benefit at 62 and let him not take his, let him wait till 70, and then you know you you can overall maximize the lifetime benefit by pulling that strategy if that's enough income.
Right. And one important caveat there, nice little reminder is if you can take the spousal at 62, you don't have to wait till full retirement age, but if you do, it's going to be delayed. I have a question a couple weeks ago. A wife emailed me and said, hey, I just started Social Security. She started at 63 and it was, she's like, it's not half. And we had talked about it and she just needed a reminder, but you're going to be reduced if you take the spousal early, which is fine. And it's still fit for her plan. It's still the right decision, but just understand that when you get your first statement and you're like, wait, he's making 3,000 and mine's only 1,200, right? It could be reduced by a little bit depending on how early you go.
Yeah, the way it works is, you have to wait till full retirement age to get half.
Yeah.
So if you go earlier than that, it's going to be half, but then it's going to be reduced because you're going early.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the other thing that we see that women aren't particularly aware of is the survivor benefit. So the survivor benefit is incredibly important to understand. And I know this was a huge deal for my mother. So, the way the survivor benefit works is if you lose a spouse, and we see this all the time, if you lose your spouse at an early age, a lot of women don't understand that, you do get the higher of the two, but you also have the ability to take that at age 60. Okay. Most people don't think they can start until 62, and most people can't. But if you are in that unique position of having lost a spouse and not gotten remarried, then you can go ahead and start survivor benefit. Now, it will be reduced, but you can get it at age 60. And sometimes that can be critical because that extra 2 years of income can be a really big deal. So understand that the survivor benefit can be started at age 60 if you lost a spouse. The other thing is, if you are divorced, you can claim against your ex-spouse. And a lot of women miss this. So if you were married for at least 10 years, and that's the magic number, 10 years, you may qualify for 50% of your ex-spouse's benefit. Your claim does not affect your ex-spouse's benefit in any way, and they don't even know that you're claiming against it. They have no idea. You don't have to contact them. You don't have to notify them. There is nothing like that. It's just your right as their ex-spouse. Okay. So important to understand that, because there could be money left on the table there if you're not careful. Now, we're going to talk just quickly about taxes. And, taxes, we use something called Roth conversion strategies with our clients. And basically, the idea behind it is, if you've saved all of your money for retirement in an IRA or a 401k or a 403b or any of these pre-tax accounts where the money is going in pre-tax before you pay taxes on it, and it is growing in that account, and at some point you'll start pulling money out, and when you do, it is taxed as income. Okay, which is the way IRAs and 401ks work. Then, what the strategy is based on is the fact that we believe here at ClearPath that taxes probably aren't going down in the future. A lot of people go into retirement believing that when they retire, their tax bracket is going to go down dramatically. That is absolutely not the case. When you retire, what you have to understand is, your money, your income is no longer derived from W-2 income, where the taxes are being deducted before you get it. And now at the end of the year, you've already paid all these taxes into the system. You get a W-2 showing that the taxes that have been paid, and then more than likely you probably get some money back. That's the kind of environment most people are used to. In retirement, there is no paycheck. The money, if you've saved all of your money for retirement in pre-tax accounts like an IRA and a 401k, then the money, every dollar you take out of that account is taxable at whatever income bracket you're in. So it changes the picture dramatically. And now those taxes, can add up quickly. And, if you're not having tax money taken out of each one of those withdrawals that you take and sent to the IRS so that you get a 1099 at the end of the year, which a lot of people fail to do, then they're not setting aside, 22% of every one of those withdrawals into an account to pay taxes at the end of the year. Then what you have to understand is, all of your income is coming from pre-tax accounts. Your tax bracket's not going down. That is not reality. So when you think about it that way, what we have seen is it makes sense a lot of times in the golden window, and that's what we call the time period between when you retire and when you have to start taking required minimum distributions, meaning you have to start taking money out of those pre-tax accounts and paying the taxes on it. And that typically for most people is around age 73 today for people who are approaching retirement. And so let's say you retire at 65 and you're going to have to start taking that money at 73. What you want to do is you want to try and get as much money out of those pre-tax accounts. Go ahead and get it into a Roth account where that money can grow tax-free, and you don't have to take required minimum distributions off of it. You never have to take and pay taxes on that money again. And that's called a Roth conversion strategy. So if you can just take a little, you take what you need to take to obviously to just, live and to have your income in retirement. But if you see that there's money, room left in your tax bracket at the end of the year, and you can take 20, 30, 40,000 each year in addition to what you need to live on, and go ahead and pull it out, convert it into a Roth, and go ahead and pay the taxes on it now, then it's going to benefit you dramatically in the future, because now that money starts to be invested into the Roth, and all of the returns that you get in that Roth, all the growth you get is tax free. If you leave it in the IRA, it just keeps growing, but it's still all taxable. So all the growth is taxable. If you put it in the Roth, all the growth is tax free. So that is the major difference there. And so, Roth conversion strategies are very important to understand. If you are in a situation where, you're a married couple and, you're looking at this, that Roth conversion strategy that you guys do, if you lost your husband suddenly, having more money in that Roth account than in the taxable, IRA accounts is going to so much help you as you move forward, because your tax bracket is going to get cut in half, just like we said. And if you have Roth money to use, and instead of having to solely depend on IRA money and take more out of the IRAs, then it's going to improve your tax picture so much, and it's going to put you in so much of a better place. So I think it's important that women understand.
It is. And that's why it's so critical to, we always say to execute those Roth conversions in the married filing brackets if you can. Because again, under that same understanding that once one spouse passes, we're going to effectively cut the tax bracket in half. But you're still going to need a similar amount of income when you're pulling from pre-tax accounts. Now you have half the room to do Roth conversions, or you're just going to pay almost 2 times more in taxes to do the Roth conversion. So it's very important if you're doing, this is a form of, planning. This is a form of estate planning, really. If you're looking at retirement and you're looking later down the road and you're like, okay, eventually one of us is going to go, let's start converting that Roth money now and do it at a way cheaper rate.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if you are already 65.
Yeah.
Because if you're 65 and, you're under certain income thresholds, for a married couple, starts around 150 and phases out completely at 250,000 a year. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, gave you an extra $12,000 standard deduction in addition to all of your other standard deductions. And that gives you even more room to execute this. But understand that that only lasts till 2028 as it stands now. So you have kind of this golden window of the next couple of years to really try and convert those, that money as much as you possibly can. And if you're struggling with this, if you're not sure about this, and you think that, you want to take a look at it, see if it really makes sense for you, give us, just come to clearpathretirement.com. Let us know. We'd love to have a conversation with you about it. We'd love to see if, this is right for you. And we'll certainly tell you and help you get clarity on this. Okay. All right. So we've talked about Roth conversions and filling tax brackets. So, here's some common mistakes that we see with Roth conversions. You don't want to convert too much too fast. You don't want to have, all the money that you convert is considered income in the year you do the conversion. So you want to be conscious of, some different things that can come back to bite you if you convert too much too fast. You could push yourself into paying a higher Medicare Part B premium, because Medicare Part B, the premium you pay is based on income. And so be conscious of that. If you do convert too much, you could lose that extra, $12,000 standard deduction for married couples, or 6,000 for singles, which is, nice to have. And if you can help it, you don't want to lose that. You also want to be conscious of the income thresholds when it comes to taxes on your Social Security. It's important to understand that when you execute these. So there are some moving parts that you need to be aware of. The other thing that I would recommend highly is, if you are in a position to pay the taxes from on the IRA, the money that you convert from the IRA to the Roth, if you're in a position to pay the taxes on that from a different account other than the IRA, so maybe you have a brokerage account, or you have some, you have significant emergency fund in the bank, where you have some good cash, that would be ideal to pay it actually from another account and not from the IRA itself. Because if you do that, then all the money from the IRA gets over into the Roth and has a chance to grow tax free, and that's going to benefit you even more. Also, be aware of state taxes when you do this. Don't just be thinking about federal taxes. State taxes come into play as well. So, don't forget that. And don't wait until R&D start to do this. Don't wait until you get to require minimum distribution age and start this. What a lot of people don't understand is, I think there's some confusion around, well, can't I just convert my RMDs? And that's not the way it works. You have to take your required minimum distribution, pay the taxes on it, and then do any conversions that you want to do. So I want to make sure we're clear on that. So, again, just to recap today's show and what we've talked about here, women face a very, very, unique situation when it comes to retirement planning. It's definitely, there's definitely some things that we've pointed out here today that women have to think about and be aware of, that, maybe their male counterparts don't. And, when you're going to be planning for a longer retirement, higher healthcare cost, you've got things like inflation and things to worry about more because you're going to live longer. All of those things are very important for you to understand. And, I have had the privilege of working with, I can't even count the number of widows and, recently divorced women that are going into retirement. And we are keenly aware of the challenges that they face. And we have real world experience in dealing with these matters. So if you feel like this is you and you want real guidance, and you feel like you need some real help, come see us at clearpathretirement.com. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you and work with you. And we appreciate you tuning in today. For all of you guys, have a happy retirement. Come back and see us next week.